Good morning. I'm Steven Honigman, a member of the NHF Board of Directors. When we think of naval history, we often think about museums, about books, and about documents. Naval history is also captured by paintings, and paintings can uniquely express the look, the emotion, and even the glamour of our Navy and its deeds and its people. Today, my friend Geoffrey Beaumont will take us through the gorgeous paintings and the remarkable life of his father, Arthur Beaumont, a commissioned naval artist who memorialized some of the pivotal ships, battle scenes, and leaders of World War II, the decade before and afterward. I'm sure that you will enjoy his presentation. And now, Geoffrey, you have the con.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group about my father's heritage, the largest naval art collection by any single artist in the U.S. Navy's history. To quantify that, in 1976, my father was interviewed by my sister, and in the interview, at one point she asked him, "Well, how many paintings have you done in your lifetime?" And he answered, after glowering at her a little bit, he said, "I'm not an accountant." He had no idea how many paintings he painted for 46 years for the Navy and another 25 years before the Navy. So all told, around a 70-year history of painting art and 46 years focusing on naval art. This is a photograph of my dad. It's a photograph of a portrait of my dad done by Gene Appleby. When he was nominated for the National Academy, you have to submit a portrait done by another artist in order to qualify for the National Academy. So this was the art. It's quite a good likeness. It was submitted with his application. So here's a picture of my dad when he was 18 years old. He lives in England. He was born in Norwich, England in 1890. And this is 1908. And he's just graduated from secondary school. He's trying to figure out what his future will be. Now, his brother, who was 4 years older, had had the same problem when he was 18. And he had solved it by immigrating to the United States, going to California, and enrolling as an engineering student at the University of California, Berkeley. And he was writing to my dad and suggesting, "You should come to California. The university is of very fine quality, it's free, and the weather's better." So my dad took up on that and decided he was going to immigrate to the United States as well. But just before he immigrated, he was also in the Cavalry Corps Reserves of the Imperial Army. He's in the back row in the center on a horse in this photograph, and he was quite an accomplished horseman. This would be important to him because in later years he would be a cowboy in both Canada and in California, using his cowboy skills to earn money to return to art school. So in 1908, he immigrates to Saskatchewan, Canada. He works for a year on a ranch, learning how to be a proper cowboy, and earns enough money to then proceed to California in 1909, where he arrives in San Francisco and enrolls at the University of California Art School, which is the Mark Hopkins Art School, located on Nob Hill in San Francisco. Now, this is just 3 years after the earthquake in San Francisco. The city is in the process of rebuilding. So the Mark Hopkins Hotel today stands on the site where in 1909 was a temporary building representing the art school of the University of California. So that is where he studied for the next year and a half until 1910. In 1910, he ran out of money again. This was a constant problem for him. And he's a teenager and he's supporting himself, and it's tough. So he decides again, he gets a job as a cowboy on the Miller and Lux Ranch, which is in Central California. It's the largest ranch in California at the time. And here he is, a picture of him as a cowboy in 1910, 1911, that period of time. He's 20 to 21 years old, and he is He's advanced rather quickly in the Miller and Lux organization for being a fence rider to being a assistant superintendent of the Pozo Ranch. Pozo Ranch is a 50,000 acre ranch to the west of Fresno, about 50 miles to the west of Fresno in the Central Valley of California. And when he was writing the fence, he determined that there were some cattle rustlers who were stealing cattle off the ranch. And he apprehended two of them, brought in the sheriff, apprehended them. He testified against them, and two of them were sent to prison. They were members of the Perini family, and the Perini family was a prominent family in the town of Fireball near the Pozo Ranch. They owned a saloon there, and they swore a vendetta against my father because of his testifying against them, sending two of their members to prison. So my father is being shot at from time to time, and he also is in fear for his life. One day he went into town, and as he was in the town of Fireball to pick up some spare parts for the ranch, his horse bolted when a steam engine came into the train station a few blocks away, and the horse dropped him on the porch of the Perini Saloon, which is about the worst place he could be. The Perinis came out, and 8 of them attacked Beau, and he was at that time seriously injured. He had a fractured skull, he had a destroyed mastoid, he had broken ribs, he had a broken arm, and he was in very serious danger of dying. Some Mexican hands from the Pozo Ranch rescued him and took him to the office of Miller and Lux, where a doctor looked at him and then sent him to the hospital. Finally, he had to have brain surgery. He had water on the brain, and he went to San Francisco. The Miller and Lux paid all of his expenses, and he had the fluids drained from his skull. He recovered and went back to the ranch in 1912. Was there for about another year, and during that year, the Perinis from time to time were still shooting at him. So he brought this to the attention of the local sheriff, and the sheriff said to him, "Well, young man, you better get out of town and change your name." Now, originally, Arthur was born Arthur Edwin Crabb. The family name was Crabb, not Beaumont. In this case, he decided to invent a name, and he added the name Beaumont to his name. So he became Arthur Edwin Beaumont, hyphenated Crabb, for a few years. And later on, he dropped the Crabb entirely. So, in proceeding with his career, in those days, he painted some paintings of his Western experiences. This one is in oil, it's a self-portrait, and it's done a few years later from his memory, but it's typical of the period when he was doing Western paintings. Now, this is before he had any connection to the Navy. In 1915, he moved to Los Angeles, where he met my mother. This is my mother, Dorothy Dean, and he called her Dot, and Dot was 17 years old. Beau was 24 years old, and my grandfather did not think that he was an appropriate suitor for his only daughter. So it took quite a few years for my father to be able to prove himself to my grandfather before they were married. And when they were 21, when Dot was 21, they eloped and they got married. So afterwards, Beau decided to go back to art school. He enrolled at the Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles. Nellie Chouinard, the founder of the school, had been a professor at Otis Art Institute. She broke off to create another art institute that was teaching more modern techniques than Otis, which was very traditional. So at that time, he studied from the early 1920s until 1925. In 1925, Mrs. Chouinard suggested that he compete for a scholarship, and he won the scholarship, and it entitled him to a 1 year of scholarship fees paid for him at the University of London Slade School of Art. So he would return to England to study, at like graduate studies, and as a result of that, he ended up both being in London, and the next year he went to Paris. In Paris, he enrolled in the Académie Julienne, which was the academy that most of the California Impressionist artists who created the plein air school in California they all went to the same school with the same instructors. And he was of that same ilk. So in 1926, he's in Paris, and this is a drawing that he did of the front door of the Académie Julienne. And during this period of time, he also was writing to my mother, and he sent her a self-portrait that he did so that she would have a good memory of him when she was back in the United States, and of course he's still in France. And here he is in front of the Notre Dame in Paris, and he is finishing up his studies at the Académie Julienne. When he returned to California, he resumed his teaching at the Chenard Art Institute from 1927 to 1929. He taught with Millard Sheets, which is another very famous California artist who was a good friend of his. In 1929, he got up the courage to open his own studio. So in August of 29, he opened this studio on Spring Street in downtown Los Angeles, and was just starting to make it pay off when the stock market crashed in October of 1929. And by 1930, the art market had virtually been destroyed by the stock market crash. And as a result of that, he closed his studio and went back to teaching. During this period of time, he was painting in the French style. This is a painting that was a prize-winning painting called Little Mother. This is my sister Phyllis when she was 7 years old, and she's not holding a baby. She's holding a doll, and she's pretending to be a mother. So Little Mother was prize-winning. But he was also doing landscapes in the nature of William Went, another famous California impressionist, and in the nature of Edgar Payne, who did many mountain scenes. Beau particularly liked harbor scenes. He loved fishing boats because of the complexities of their composition. And he used to give his classes down in the harbor. Now, he was unemployed at this point in time because he had not been able to go back to Chenard. They'd filled the position. He closed his studio. So my mother, Dot, was basically supporting the family at this period of time. So he's still doing his paintings at the harbor, but she's trying to get him commissions to do other paintings as well to earn a little money in 1930, 1931. Very tough years for the family. My mother was supporting the family at that time. She had been the first female valedictorian of UCLA, and when she graduated, she was also the first Phi Beta Kappa of UCLA. And UCLA hired her as Assistant Dean of Women as a result of her academic excellence. So she was working for UCLA, and she was during that time trying to get commissions from my dad. And she knew the bishop's wife of the Episcopal bishop of the Diocese of Los Angeles. And the Diocese of Los Angeles had a mission church in Point Hope, Alaska. Now, Point Hope was a village of about 850 people, and 550 of those people, these were Inuit Eskimos, were Episcopalian. So the mission church had been very successful in the town of Point Hope. And the Diocese of Los Angeles wanted to reward the mission church with a gift as they elevated the mission church to being a parish. And so they commissioned my father to do the only religious painting he ever did. This is a painting of Christ, and he is showing his wounds to the doubting St. Thomas. It's called Doubting Thomas. And this is the altarpiece for the church in Point Hope, Alaska, the northernmost Episcopal church in the world. Later on, my dad would paint in the Arctic, and he would visit this church. My mother was also, as a member of the staff of UCLA, in a position to recommend my dad for commissioning the Olympic posters. UCLA was going to be one of the host entities of the Los Angeles Olympics, and so he did the Olympic posters for 1932. His concept was to do all of the cities that had hosted the Olympics. There were 8 cities from 1896 until 1932 that had been hosts, and he painted an image of each one of those cities. I've chosen to show 2 here. This is the city of London in the poster, and this is the city of Paris, 2 places that he, of course, had lived during his graduate studies. In 1931, he met Captain Percy Foote in Los Angeles, actually in Long Beach. And Percy Foote was an art collector and was captain of the USS Arkansas. Percy Foote admired his art so much that he decided to commission him to do his own portrait. So here we have a picture of Captain Percy Foote. This is done aboard the USS Arkansas, and there is Beau on the left, and there's the portrait. And he never worked from photographs. Beau always worked from live entities. So if you're going to have a portrait, you have to sit with that portrait. If you're going to do a picture of a ship, he goes to the harbor and he does a sketch of the ship, brings it back and does a painting in the studio. In 1930s, his studio was in the building on the right here. This is a picture of the waterfront of Long Beach, California, in later years. The building on the right is the Pacific Coast Club. It was built in the nature of a Norman castle. Up on top is a penthouse. It's an A-frame penthouse that belonged to the Hathaway family, a prominent Los Angeles family. And the Hathaways offered this space to him, the studio to him, as a place where he could do his paintings of the fleet, which he could see from that building. On the left is the Villa Riviera Hotel. In later years, when he met Admiral Leahy and his wife lived in the tower on the left and frequently visited Beau in his studio on the right. In 1932, Captain Percy Foote introduced Beau to Admiral William Leahy. At that time, Admiral Leahy was a rear admiral. He was in charge of the scouting force of the battle fleet in San Diego. And when he heard about Beau doing Percy Foote's portrait, he put his name on the list and he wanted a portrait as well. In the end, he became my father's principal patron for the rest of his career. He became the highest ranking naval officer in World War II and became the first fleet admiral of the United States Navy. Beau did 3 portraits of him. This is a sketch of the first portrait. And this is a picture of the third portrait, which was when Admiral Leahy, some years ago in 1937, was appointed Chief of Naval Operations. He had been Battle Fleet Commander in Long Beach, and subsequent to that time, he was appointed Chief of Naval Operations. But going back to 1934, there was a fleet review in New York Harbor by the President of the United States aboard the USS Indianapolis. And here's a picture of Beau with his Navy uniform as a lieutenant. That's the official artist of the Navy. And he is on board the Louisville. And what you're looking at in the background is the USS Indianapolis, Roosevelt's flagship. Beau was invited by Captain Smealy, captain of the Indianapolis, to participate in the ceremonies with the president. And he had already painted the Indianapolis on many occasions. It was one of his favorite ships. He thought it was one of the most beautiful ships in the U.S. Navy, although in later years it was ill-fated. And here he is doing his sketch in the harbor of the Indianapolis. And here's a picture of the resulting sketch of the Indianapolis. So in 1934, in May of 1934, you have the Fleet Review in New York Harbor. It's the largest review the Navy has ever had. And President Roosevelt will be reviewing the entire fleet. Beau had done a painting for President Roosevelt. This painting is of the Indianapolis with the Amberjack in the foreground. The Amberjack is a yacht that was owned by Roosevelt, and the Indianapolis, of course, was his flagship. So Beau put them together in this image, which was presented by Captain Smealy as a gift from the crew of the Indianapolis to the president. The president liked the painting very much. In fact, during the presentation, he invited Beau to come to his cabinet. They had a private conversation for about 15 minutes, and President Roosevelt thanked Beau for having done this painting. In later years, President Roosevelt had the painting left on board the Indianapolis in his cabin to await his return in the future. We thought that this painting went down when the ship was sunk in 1945 after carrying the atomic bomb to Kwajalein. The ship was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and sank with tremendous loss of life. We thought the painting was lost at that time, but 40 years after the event of the ship sinking. In 1987, my brother was being given an award from the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, and I decided to go to Hawaii for the award. We were invited by the commander of the submarine base to go on a submarine trip on a nuclear submarine. And when we went to his office, I noted that this painting was over his desk. We had rediscovered the painting of the Indianapolis that we thought was lost with the ship. So that is now part of the Navy, an important part of the Navy collection in Washington, although they have loaned it to the Arizona Memorial. Here's a picture of Roosevelt's bedroom in Hyde Park. This is after he died. Of course, it is now a national park. And if you look closely, you'll see on the upper right is an image of a Navy ship. It is a picture of the USS Tuscaloosa. And this was a gift from Admiral Leahy to President Roosevelt. He commissioned my father to do this work. As a result of having Beau do this work, he put it in his bedroom, and now it will stay there for the rest of time because it's a national park. In the mid-1930s, back to that time, the first painting that he did of the USS Saratoga is this one. It shows the Saratoga, it's launching biplanes. And in the background, you'll see destroyers with 4 stacks. They're burning coal. So the Navy was then in transition to having the entire fleet burn oil instead of coal. But this is a very early painting. In 1933, the Constitution from Boston had been restored and was towed to all of the seaports of the United States. It came to Long Beach in mid-1933, and Beau did several paintings of the Constitution. So here you have Beau on board the Constitution, delivering a painting of the Constitution to former Secretary of the Navy, Curtis Wilbur. And this shows in the background, you'll see the governor of California in the top hat of the cutaway. When the Constitution returned to Long Beach Harbor, there was a fleet review, and Beau created this image of the Constitution, passing in review of the battleships of the battle fleet in Long Beach. This painting now resides at the Constitution Museum in Boston. In the early 1930s, Beau painted virtually all of the capital ships of the United States Navy. Here's a picture of the USS Ranger, one of the early aircraft carriers coming through the Panama Canal. It's an image I particularly like because you get a tropical landscape in the foreground, and you get a Navy ship coming through the canal in the background. Quite a beautiful and unusual juxtaposition. He also did posters for Navy recruiting. There's a picture of Teddy Roosevelt, the father of the modern Navy. And he also did a series of fleet exercise paintings. Here is a rather unusual composition of, these are scout planes from the battleship USS Tennessee, which you see down below. They are biplanes and seaplanes. In those days, there was no radar, so these were the eyes of the fleet in the early days before radar appeared during World War II. In 1934, Beau decided to resign his commission in the regular Navy and to join the California Naval Guard. That was fortuitous because he was able to meet one of the members of that Naval Guard unit, and that person was John Ford, a famous movie director. Beau became one of the confidants of John Ford. They became good friends. John Ford introduced him to John Wayne, and Beau did paintings of both John Ford's yacht, which is here. This is the Runner, and this was the boat that John Ford had his notorious drinking parties in between shooting his movies. Beau was one of his buddies, and he would go to sea on this boat out on the Wild Goose, John Wayne's yacht. He would go salmon fishing. But Beau was also introduced by John Ford to a number of prominent people, most prominent Frank Lloyd, who was a major producer of movies in Hollywood, and to Marion Davies, who was the paramour of William Randolph Hearst. So here's a picture of Beau on board the deck of the Bounty. He did the artwork for the storyboards for the movie, Mutiny on the Bounty. You have Clark Gable on the left, dressed as Fletcher Christian. You have Edith Head in the center. She designed the costumes, and Beau on the right with his tweeds and his sketchbook. This is on the deck of the Bounty. That movie won the Academy Award in 1935. In 1935 also was the year that he set up his studio at the Pacific Coast Club. This is a rather degraded picture of it, but it shows that the club was built like a Norman castle. The tower on the left, the upper part of the tower, was the penthouse that was his studio, from which you could see the battleships in the harbor below. This was the scene he did in the late 1930s. He was also doing more portraits. He did this portrait of Colonel James Underhill. Colonel Underhill, during the war, became a lieutenant general, and he was in charge of the Marine Corps in the Pacific during the battles of the Pacific. In the late 1930s, Beau did pictures. Here's a photograph of a painting of the USS Oklahoma. This was a painting in my collection. I gave this to the Arizona Memorial. They had many pictures of the Arizona, but they had no pictures of the ship that was next to the Arizona when she blew up, the Oklahoma. You may remember this was the battleship that turned over and caught so many men in the hull. It was very tragic at the attack on Pearl Harbor. In 1939, Beau was cruising aboard the USS Arizona. Here's a picture of the Arizona painted before Pearl Harbor, and his host at this time was Admiral Chester Nimitz, who was a rear admiral at that time and was battleship division commander. When the war broke out in Europe in 1939, with the Nazi invasion of Poland, September of 1939, William Randolph Hearst had gotten to know Beau because of his association with Marion Davies. Beau had attended several dinner parties, both at their beach house in Santa Monica and in San Simeon, their castle up in Central California. And William Randolph Hearst hired Beau to become chief illustrator and do his illustrations of the war in Europe. The images were coming in of battle scenes from Europe. They were coming in by teletype, and they had no images to go with the teletype story. So Beau was at the time, he had a broken leg. He was in his studio in Los Angeles. He couldn't move very easily, but a messenger would bring him the story, and he would then envision the scene. This is the only time that he used photographs to create the images, because he did not ever see these German ships or the Japanese ships or the English ships. He only knew the American ships. So he would go to Jane's Fighting Ships, take out the images, and then create a composition from those images. In this case, these are two German raiders we're at sea in 1939 and 1940. Here's another image from this series. These are ink paintings. They're done in approximately 3 to 4 hours. They're then photographed and put on the front page of the newspaper. It's the only time he ever used white ink. You can see on the right there that the portholes are outlined in white. And that's because this is going to be photographed, and they needed more definition to be able to have it show properly when it became an item in the newspaper. In late 1940 into 1941, the National Geographic saw that the war was coming, and they decided that they wanted to have a military series of paintings, which they'd never done before in their magazine's history. There were 2 admirals and 2 generals on the board of the National Geographic. The admirals indicated that Arthur Beaumont should be the one selected to do the Navy paintings for the National Geographic. So in mid-1941, he completed a series of paintings of the various aspects of the Navy at the time, different types of ships. And this is in a series that's called The Ships That Guard Our Ocean Ramparts. And this appeared in the September of 1941 issue of the National Geographic magazine. They made Beau very famous. The National Geographic had one of the highest circulations of any magazine in the country at the time, several million people, and people saved their National Geographics. Everyone had a garage filled with National Geographic magazines. And so this particular issue, September 1941, was on people's desks still when the attack came on Pearl Harbor. Here's a picture. I'm holding a painting that is a working drawing for the painting of the Astoria. And you can see in the working drawing that there are you can just barely make out. There are two ships there, but you can hardly see the second ship. Well, in the final composition, which you see on the right, there's a second ship that's very well defined. And that's the difference between the working drawing and the final painting. Also, the coloration is somewhat different. Here he is. He did the paintings of naval aviation. You can see an aircraft carrier in the background, seaplanes. He did destroyers, capturing sea, very vigorous sea. This was one of his trademarks. Auxiliary ships, it's an oiler. Submarines is the first Nautilus, rendezvousing with another one of the submarines. And this is the Hornet and the Wasp, two of the new aircraft carriers that were being commissioned in 1941. Here's the image that I chose for the cover of my book, The Art of the Sea. This is the USS Maryland with the USS New Mexico in the background. Again, these paintings are not photographic. You can see that there's a ship in the foreground that is much too close to the bow of that battleship, but that's done for dramatic effect. Well, there were two Army officers who were also on the board of the National Geographic magazine, and there was a little inter-service rivalry at the time, and the Army decided that they needed to have a series of paintings by Arthur Beaumont as well, published in the National Geographic magazine. And the generals involved were General John Pershing, who was the head of the American Expeditionary Armies in World War I, and also General Hap Arnold, the head of the Army Air Corps. And they lobbied the National Geographic to do a larger series of paintings for the Army to appear in the National Geographic after Pearl Harbor in 1942. So he started the paintings and doing the research for the paintings when he was hired by the National Geographic, because he did not know any of the Army equipment. So he had to study all of the equipment, become familiar with it. But here he is on Army maneuvers in South Carolina. He met General Patton during this particular Army exercise, live ammunition exercise. And this is in December of 1941, the week before Pearl Harbor. He takes his drawings from this series. He goes to Washington, D.C., and he arrives in Washington, D.C. on the morning of December 7th. Here are some of the drawings of some of the Army equipment that he was unfamiliar with. He's just learning what it's about. And this is what one of the finished paintings of the artillery for the Army showed. This is also, here are the ski troops in the mountains above. This is up near June Lake in California, the High Sierra Mountains. But these are Army ski troops. The Army series, which appeared in the September issue of 1942, included 16 paintings, whereas the Navy series was only 8 paintings. But in both cases, it continued to make Beau very famous. When the attack on Pearl Harbor came on December 7th, 1941, Beau never did a painting showing the ships that had been attacked. But he did show a painting the same week. He did a painting of the attack on Wake Island. Here's a Marine Corps plane, bomber, attacking a Japanese cruiser who was attacking the island of Wake. The Japanese were successful in capturing the island of Wake, and that was the same week as the attack on Pearl Harbor. 4 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Army and Navy had decided we have to do something to show what the American military presence is still a threat to the Emperor of Japan. So Jimmy Doolittle, who was a colonel at that time, lieutenant colonel at that time, proposed that Army bombers take off Navy ships and attack Tokyo. So here you have, in April of 1942, just 4 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, here they are, the B-25 bombers on board the carrier Hornet, and they are about to be launched to attack Tokyo. There was a movie made of this called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. Here's the Hornet launching the first plane, which was flown by Colonel Doolittle. And if you'll notice, this is a picture of the Hornet. Beau did a painting of the Doolittle raid after conferring with the Office of Naval Intelligence, to whom he reported. And Navy intelligence said, well, you can't show what ship it was. We don't want them to know what ship it is. So put in a new Essex class carrier. And you can tell the difference between this and the previous carriers because this carrier has 5-inch anti-aircraft guns mounted on the flight deck. Whereas if you look at the Hornet, there are no 5-inch anti-aircraft guns on the deck of the Hornet. This painting is one of the few paintings that was classified secret. But in fact, the airplane that's also flying off is not one of the B-25 bombers. So it's supposedly recording a historic event, but it's a fictional historic event. That same year, the Navy announced that they were going to build a ship, USS Los Angeles. And Beau was enlisted to do the public relations work for the campaign to raise money, war bonds, for the USS Los Angeles. Here he is signing lithographs. The campaign set out to raise $41 million in 1942 dollars, and instead they were so successful they raised $81 million. As a result of that, the Navy was ecstatic. They decided that it would be not a light cruiser, but a heavy cruiser, and that they would build 4 additional escort vessels with the money that had been raised in the bond campaign. So here's the lithographs he signed for people who buy war bonds. He did posters all over the city of Los Angeles to engage broad public support and make the campaign successful. Beau did not do very many war paintings. By that I mean battle scenes, but he did a few. And here's perhaps the most interesting one that I found. This is a picture of a Baltimore-class cruiser, and there's a kamikaze attack going on. This is at Okinawa in 1944. And you can see it's really quite remarkable. The ship is battle worn. You can see the paint has been japed off the side of the ship. And you have this planes in the water, planes in the sky in this battle scene. But he also painted virtually all types of ships during the war. Here he did a troop ship. You'll notice it's camouflaged. He was on the committee that advised the Navy on how the camouflage should be designed. And he did paintings of jeep carriers with destroyer escorts, destroyers. Here's a picture of the USS English, DD 696. I put this in here. It's a little bit of self-publicity, but this ship served in World War II. But in the 1960s, early 1960s, I was the communication officer aboard this ship in the North Atlantic for 2 years, seasick most of the time. So I told my dad, well, please, when you do my ship, do a really big wave. So this is the painting that resulted from that, really big waves, and it was appropriate to the occasion. He also painted virtually all of the capital ships of the fleet during this period of time, as well as many of the escort vessels. This is the USS Owens. And here is a painting of Admiral Arleigh Burke's Little Beavers. This was done in later years, reflecting a World War II event. But when Arleigh Burke retired as Chief of Naval Operations, one of our most influential admirals, this was the painting that was given to him as a gift. At the very end of the war, Beau was on the shakedown cruise of the USS Midway. The day the war ended, he was on board the ship in the Caribbean. This is the first of our so-called supercarriers. Today, of course, the Midway is a museum in San Diego Harbor, and it's a really remarkable sized ship. After the war, he continued to paint the Navy, and he did a series of, this is a painting of the USS Los Angeles, returning to Los Angeles Harbor. You can see on the right-hand side, you can see the lighthouse. And he also did the paintings of the atomic bomb at Bikini. So in 1946, the Navy realized that the atomic bomb was a threat to the Navy, and they had to do a test to find out what the impact would be on ships at sea. So they designed the Task Force 1 Operations Crossroad atomic bomb test at Bikini. This is done in mid-1946, approximately 9 months after the end of World War II. This is a picture of the Able bomb, and Beau was the official artist for recording this. He was the first artist to witness and record in paintings the atomic bomb. This is the photograph of the event, and this is the painting of the event. This is done on board the cruiser Fall River. That was one of the two flagships of Admiral Ferrone. And you can see here the officers are wearing dark goggles. Beau chose not to wear the goggles. He hid his eyes during the brightness of the white flash, and then he did not want it to distort his color so that he could do the proper colors, and the goggles distorted the colors severely. Here you have the second bomb. This is the Baker bomb, and here this is the resultant painting of the Baker bomb. Beau always maintained that his paintings represented the true colors. The photographs did not represent the correct colors because the flash was so bright it caused the light meters to shut down and they lost the quality of their color. So he said the photographs never did show how brilliant the colors were. Here he is painting between the two bombs, plein air, on the scene. He did about 100 paintings of from the atomic bomb tests. Here's the battleship Nevada. These paintings were organized in a major exhibit that traveled around the United States, sponsored by the Navy and sponsored by the Smithsonian Institute. In this case, this exhibit, when it came to Chicago, it was mounted at the Chicago Institute of Science, and approximately 600,000 people saw the exhibit when it was in Chicago. Over 1 million people saw the exhibit nationwide in multiple venues. Here again is the battleship Nevada. The aircraft carrier Independence, severely damaged. This is a picture of the Japanese battleship Nagato sinking. This was the flagship of Yamamoto when the Japanese fleet attacked Pearl Harbor. We sank it at Bikini. This is the USS Kate, which was damaged on the outside, but the interior hull was not damaged, and the crew was able to get it underway and parade it past the flagship, showing that the ship was still seaworthy. That's a bit of a push because it really wasn't, it couldn't submerge. Here's a picture of the Saratoga going down. As you remember, Beau painted one of his earliest paintings was the Saratoga launching the biplanes. Here's another painting of the Saratoga going down. That was a very dramatic event, and it was a feature of the exhibit that traveled around the United States. In the post-war years, Beau traveled with the Navy to China, and he was in China in 1947 and 48 during the Civil War there, the Revolutionary War there. Here's a picture of the cruiser St. Paul on the Yangtze River. Beau's watercolor style changed a bit when he was in the Orient. He had studied the Japanese scroll painters, and you can see that the palette has changed and the style of painting has changed. It's very, very passive and very oriental. Here he is on board the flagship, the USS St. Paul, en route to China. And here's one of his civilian paintings of the Temple of Heaven in the Imperial City in Beijing. He also did pictures of Chinese junks on the river. It's a particularly beautiful watercolor. And here's another one of a companion piece done from the same period of time. Well, Beau was on board the St. Paul, and on other ships he served on. He would give art classes. Here he is. In the foreground where we're looking at it, there would have been a whole bunch of crew members watching him do a painting of the St. Paul. After the war, he also did murals. This is a mural he did in Los Angeles of the discovery of California. This was done for the Jonathan Club, private club in Los Angeles. And here's a picture. There he is painting with that's my nephew, John, his studio assistant. And this is what the portrait looked in full color. In the mid-1950s, Beau was commissioned to do a secret work. The General Dynamics Electric Boat Division commissioned him to do a painting of the USS Novelists. This is a picture of the Nautilus under construction. It was going to be launched by Mamie Eisenhower, the wife of President Eisenhower. And he had a hard time painting this because it was such a secret subject that it was covered with tarps. You could hardly see the boat. You couldn't see the Navy didn't want you to see anything. So he dressed this painting up. He didn't think it was one of his better compositions, but he dressed it up by adding a lot of color. You can see in the water below, particularly, it's a beautiful watercolor painting. But this painting ultimately was given to Mamie Eisenhower. She took it to the White House when the president reviewed it. When they left the White House after his term was up, she gave it to the Nautilus and went back and was in the wardroom of the Nautilus for the entire career when the ship was in active service. And when it retired, it became a museum. It's currently at Groton, Connecticut. And the painting, when it's not on tour, as it is right now, it will be next to the photograph of Mamie Eisenhower with the bottle of champagne christening the first nuclear submarine. In the late 1950s, Beau receives an invitation to go on the first geophysical year expedition to the North Pole. The Navy has decided they're going to, with the Canadian Navy, to transit from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean through the ice on the route that was discovered by Roald Amundsen. So here you have a picture of the Canadian icebreaker. The fleet was led by a Canadian ship when they were in Canadian waters. It was led by the American ship when they were in American waters. And this is the first passage through the Northwest Passage by a deep vessel ship. Beau did a whole series of paintings of the Arctic and subsequently the Antarctic. Beau viewed the icebergs as being sculptures. He loved them. He thought the Antarctic was absolutely terrific. He was in the Arctic in 1958 and 59. 1960 and 61, he was in the Antarctic. He made a total of 3 expeditions, 1 to the north and 2 to the south. And here he is painting, watercolor painting on the ice in the Antarctic. Now, you wondered, how can you do a watercolor when it's 20 degrees below zero? Well, it's not easy. It takes some preparation. In this case, he determined that if you mixed 30% alcohol with 70% water, it would be just enough to keep the water from freezing, and the water would flow with the paint through the brush without crystallizing. And here he is doing a painting. You can see he's got his palette in his left hand, his paintbrush in his right hand, and he's got hand warmers because he can only paint for less than a minute each time. He did some very exquisite paintings in the Antarctic. This is a picture of Mount Erebus. That's the icebreaker glacier. In the foreground, Mount Erebus is the tallest mountain in the Antarctic. It's around 12,000 feet, plus or minus, and it's an active volcano. Here's a picture of the expedition ship of Sir Vivian Fuchs. It got caught in the ice, and it was rescued by the American icebreakers. Here's a picture of the glacier, icebergs in the background, really elegant. And he also visited the South Pole, which is at 9,000 feet and very, very cold. Here's a picture of the actual South Pole, literally the South Pole, and a radar dome. And if you look carefully in the bottom left, there's a self-portrait of Beau doing his painting outside of the South Pole. In the years 1960s, he continues to paint the ships as the technology evolves. This is a picture of the USS New Jersey under full steam. This is a picture on board a cruiser. He's doing his sketches again, always live sketches. And this is a picture of the USS Rochester. It's a painting called The Speed Run. In 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected, of course, as President of the United States, and he was being inaugurated in January of 1961. Governor Pat Brown, who was a member of the Army-Navy Club, the Jonathan Club, where Beau was a member, came to the club members and said, we've got to have a gift for the president. So they put together a fund, and they purchased this painting of the USS Rochester. And Governor Brown hand-carried this painting to the inauguration and presented to John Kennedy at that time. It is now in the Kennedy Museum in Boston. Here's a picture of Beau towards the end of his career. He's in his 80s now, and he's painting a painting of the USS John F. Kennedy and USS Joseph Kennedy. Now, these two ships never served together in actuality, but it was to honor the Kennedy family. Here, it's an interesting photograph because you can see the painting partially completed, with the details of the ships is very completed. He's just about to start to paint in the finished, the sea. Here's the finished painting here, showing the motion of the ships. You can see is caught by the captured by the sea. Here's a picture of the USS England. This is a guided missile destroyer, a frigate. It's done in later years. This was a gift by my brother to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip when they came to California to visit President Reagan in 1983. This painting was presented to the Queen on board the Queen's yacht and is now in the Greenwich Museum collection in England. In the late 1960s, he's also doing the latest technology. Here's the USS Scamp in San Diego Harbor. He didn't think the submarines were particularly interesting architecturally, so he always would dress them up with scenes in the background that would make the composition more interesting. And then in early 1960s, you also had the final voyage of the Queen Mary. This was done when the Queen Mary arrived in Long Beach. You can see in the background off the starboard bow of the Queen Mary, on the left-hand side of the painting, is the USS Long Beach, a nuclear cruiser. Beau was on the bridge of that cruiser when he did his sketches of the Queen Mary arriving. At the same time, in the late 1960s, Beau decided to go back. He was interested in recapturing sailing vessels. So here he did a picture of the USS. This is the Eagle, the U.S. Coast Guard vessel Eagle. It's the training ship for the Coast Guard. And Beau had known Walt Disney all of his career. Walt had offered to make him one of his cartoon artists back in the 1920s when Beau was a student at the Chard Art Institute. Walt Disney was one of the supporters of the Art Institute. And Walt called him and said, I've got this invitation from the captain of the Eagle to come down and go for a cruise. Would you like to go with me? So Beau flew down with Walt in Walt's plane from Burbank down to Miramar. They took a helicopter out to the escort vessel, which you can see in the background here. And here is Beau on board the deck of the Eagle. It's the captain of the Eagle on the right, and that's Walt Disney on the left. This is towards the end of Walt's life. He died shortly after this. He was suffering from cancer. And but they spent the entire day on board the Eagle. And this is the resultant painting from that. It shows the escort vessel in the background, an Eagle under full sail. Well, this got Beau's interest in doing, raised his interest in doing more sailing vessels. So he went back in preparation for the bicentennial in 1976, and he painted in the years preceding that most of the ships from the Revolutionary War and the Battle of War of 1812. So this is the USS Constitution. This is the USS Pennsylvania. This is the Constellation. And this is a painting that skips to another topic. This is, in fact, in Vietnam. In 1969, Beau made a secret visit to Vietnam. He was only there for about 2 weeks. He flew over and he flew back, but the Navy wanted him to capture the naval activity that was going on there at the time. So here's a destroyer escort that is interdicting some of the shipping. The Viet Cong were shipping ammunition, supplies, and food down the coast to their troops in the south, and it was the Navy's job to try and stop that flow of supplies. This is at sea, destroyer escort, and this is on the Mekong River with one of the river boats. So Beau made this trip in 1969. I never knew what date exactly because he didn't keep a diary because it was a secret mission. There was no diary to give out the details of the trip. But I gave a speech to the Naval Operating Base in San Diego a couple of years ago, and a retired admiral came up to me afterwards and said that he was in the room when my dad called on Admiral Beaumont in Saigon in November of 1969. So that identified the specific date of his trip and gave me some information I didn't have before that. Towards the end of his career, you saw him painting the first aircraft carriers. This is one of the latest aircraft carriers. This is the USS Enterprise, followed by the USS Long Beach in the background and the Bainbridge off the port quarter. This is the nuclear squadron, and it shows that Beau had, towards the end of his career, he transitioned from ships burning coal to nuclear vessels 46 years later. This is the last voyage of the Queen Mary that arrived in Long Beach, and this is the last photograph that I had of, I was with my dad when he had his retrospective exhibit. This was in Laguna Beach at the Art Museum. We went to 4 different museums, 150 paintings, and Beau was 86 at this time. He passed away 2 years later. This is the image of Beau, and this is the image of my book that I've written about Beau, and that's the conclusion of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Our foundation welcomes both Geoffrey and Gale Munro, the curator of Naval Art for the Naval History and Heritage Command, to our panel this morning. Before we begin with your questions from the viewing audience, I'd like to share my own personal anecdotes about Commander Beaumont. When my stepfather, Joe Gould, from the Naval Academy class of 43, retired from the Navy in the late 60s, he became the head of the Naval Science Department for the San Clemente High School Naval Junior ROTC program. In that capacity, we met Arthur and Dorothy through neighbors and friends. In the late 60s, San Clemente had a flourishing collection of organizations that honored and supported the military, specifically World War II and Korean War service, but also Vietnam, predominantly the Navy and the Marine Corps. San Clemente, as most of you know, is positioned at the north gate of Camp Pendleton at Camp San Mateo, where I learned how to drive, alongside Camp San Onofre, Horno, and Basilone Road. Organizations like the Military Order of the World Wars, Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, and other societies were bursting at the seams in membership and fellowship. Arthur Beaumont was a regular feature at many of these events. My parents developed a friendship with the Beaumonts, and in fact, on the occasion of my commissioning as an ensign, Commander Beaumont presented me with a copy of his work, All Engines Ahead 1/3, a portrait of the USS England, then Guided Missile Destroyer 22. It rests with honor in my office in the Washington Navy Yard. With that background, let's begin our discussion. Ms. Munro, can you briefly describe your role at NHHC? And have you and Geoffrey, collaborated on projects in the past?
Sure, hello. I am the head curator of the Navy Art Collection. That is one of the departments of the Collections Management Division of the Naval History and Heritage Command. I have been working with the collection since October of 1989. And gosh, I can't remember the first time I talked to Geoffrey, and I talked to your brother Dean as well occasionally, but it's been many years, and I think we worked on a couple of exhibits of your father's work over the years. And of course, the one that's currently out at the Atomic Testing Museum near Las Vegas, Nevada.
Great, thank you. For Ms. Munro, how many original Beaumont pieces are resident in your collection at NHHC?
Sure, I wrote that number down. As far as originals go, we have 44 watercolors, 1 oil painting, which is a portrait of Thomas Tingy Craven, and 6 drawings.
Great, thank you. So this is a question, we have a lot of questions from the audience, but I'm reserving the right to ask one, and I reach out to Geoffrey. Growing up in Southern California, we had occasion to run into a lot of stars in that, but you mentioned Walt Disney, you mentioned Clark Gable, John Wayne, John Ford, the list goes on. Did you personally have occasion to meet and hang out and fellowship with any of these aforementioned stars?
Actually, the association with Clark Gable was when he worked on the movie Mutiny on the Bounty, which won the Academy Award in 1935. And that was before I was born. So this era is not part that I participated in.
I understand. So this one's a two-part question. First, are Commander Beaumont's collection featured in traveling exhibitions? And if so, where? And the second part, are there restoration or conservation efforts necessary or ongoing given the age of some of his great work? Geoffrey, over to you on that, sir.
Well, regarding current exhibits, the Irvine Museum, which holds most of the collection that I gave to them, has put together a traveling exhibit with a 5-year schedule to go to 10 museums. We've been significantly impacted by the pandemic in that a couple of the museums were not able to open because there were restrictions on their ability to open. So the next scheduled museum will be Bath, Maine, and they hope to open there in December of this year, and it will run through June of next year. After that, it will go to Savannah, Georgia, and it will go to the Nimitz Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, near San Antonio, and it will end up at the U.S. Navy Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., about 2 years from now. We also have currently in Las Vegas, my hometown, an exhibit of the atomic bomb paintings and assisted by some private collections, which will run from, it's already mounted and will run through the end of the year, this year. So anyone coming to Las Vegas, be sure and go to the National Atomic Testing Museum. With regard to restorations, most of the collection is watercolors. To give you an idea of the size of the body of works we're talking about all told, my mother, who was the bookkeeper of our family, and kept track of, paid taxes and kept track of things. She estimated that my father had completed more than 1,200 finished studio works. Of that, approximately 90% are Navy, and of that, about 95% of the Navy paintings are watercolors. The watercolors are typically stored away between exhibits, and as a result of that, they're not exposed to possibility of deterioration, and our watercolor collection is in outstanding condition today, just because it's been maintained well. When it comes to oils, it depends on where the oils were held. If they were in the Navy collections or the Irvine Museum or UCI collections, they were well maintained in perfect storage conditions. But some of the paintings that went into private collections deteriorated, were not properly taken care of. And I had one painting of the beautiful oil of the battleship Pennsylvania, the flagship of the fleet at Pearl Harbor, done in 1938. And it was an oil painting painted in the French style. And it had been in a private collection in a private home in Beverly Hills. It was unfortunately in the room where they played billiards and they smoked cigars. And as a result of that, the painting dried out very significantly, and you could actually lift it up and you could see pinhole, see the light coming through the painting itself. So I gave it to the restorers at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and they spent 2 years restoring that painting. And they put beeswax on the back of the painting and let it sit for a long time. And as a result of that, the moisture returned to the canvas and the holes sealed. So the painting today is in excellent condition, and we maintain it so it won't happen again. But you can't tell what has happened in other private collections. And more than half of the paintings are in private collections, mostly of the families of captains and admirals and officers on the ships who wanted pictures of the ships in which they served. That's the primary bread and butter of my father's career, was painting paintings of portraits of ships.
Thank you for that answer. We had a family friend, Vice Admiral Richard H. Cruzen, Naval Academy class of 21, and he had his own personal portrait was painted by your father, And I know that just word of mouth, and I don't know how all these works were accounted, but I was aware of several substantial portraits that he did that were in the private homes of some legends in World War II. I think Admiral Cruzen certainly had a Arctic and Antarctic background, but he was also the N3 in the Battle of the Leyte Gulf for, I think, Admiral Halsey. But anyway, lots of great stuff, and the historic preservation is very important. So one of the questions for Ms. Monroe, and it was kind of written in a little frustration, and I'm just going to give it to you straight without the editorial, but given the pandemic and the very difficult access to our naval art treasures, is there any move afoot to display our collection in a location in the National Mall or other site that the general public can actually see and appreciate?
Well, I can understand the frustration. I have plenty of my own. I would say that currently our only regular exhibition area in the Washington area is we have a section on the floor of the Navy Museum. And as has been observed, it takes some doing to get onto the Navy Yard. Basically, you have to clear a criminal background check. So it can be frustrating. Beyond that, we are praying that the new Navy Museum, when it's built, will have a section set aside for us there as well. Hopefully a little bit larger, but we can work with anything. As far as exhibiting on the National Mall, that's not my territory. I think most of the National Mall belongs to either the Park Service or the Smithsonian, and they probably have their own plans for that.
Well, I'm pretty close to the activities concomitant with the National Museum of the United States Navy, the new museum. And I do know that there's a great emphasis on providing just the right space for the right collection. And so we look forward to that sooner rather than later. But it's been a tough go for really any activity in the Washington Navy Yard. And of course, it's so historic that it's criminally a shame that the public can't access all the greatness that exists in that locale. This question's for Geoffrey. What are the most prestigious sites where your father's art is featured presently? And are there maritime artists that he admired especially?
He particularly liked the works of Henry Reuterdahl, who was, the official artist from World War I. He did mostly in oil, but very, very competently done. When Henry Reuterdahl died in the mid-1920s, the Navy had no artist, and that created the opening that Admiral Leahy spotted and said, "Would you like to be the artist of the Navy to my dad?" And so in 1931, 32, and finally 33, when he got his commission, he became the official artist of the fleet, succeeding Henry Reuterdahl. Also, C.R. Smith, R.G. Smith, who was a student of my dad's, painted wonderful paintings of Navy ships sometime later in my dad's career.
Thank you. We had spoken extemporaneously just before the show this morning about the other locales in the Navy Museum family of museums that Beaumont art might reside, such as the Naval Academy and other locales. Ms. Monroe or Geoffrey, either one or both, can you share some other locations so that if our viewers are out and about, they might seek out and find some of the great works of Arthur Beaumont?
Sure. Okay, go ahead first.
I was just going to say, because most of the paintings are watercolors, they are in storage a good part of the time, and they're only brought out when you have specific exhibits, such as that organized by the Irvine Museum. In the case of the Irvine Museum, they were involved with 10 different museums around the country, although it's been interrupted by the pandemic. When it comes to oil paintings, they're more durable, and you can see them as part of the collections. At the Jonathan Club in Los Angeles has a room called the Beaumont Room. It's a private club, but it has a long history of displaying that. My father was a member of that club, and they just display his art on a permanent basis. But typically, the paintings are only shown on specific exhibits, such as the one we have today at the National Atomic Testing Museum here in Las Vegas.
And Gale, do you have any other insights into that question, where we might find Beaumont art in other museum locales sponsored by the Navy?
Sure. The Atomic Testing Museum was open, I understand, for a portion during the pandemic, and pretty much follows the Nevada rules on whether public spaces can be open or not. It was open. Somebody told me last week that it had closed again, but I think they will open as soon as they can, because they like having visitors, and that's their lifeblood. So if they're not open yet, they will be back open when Nevada is reopened. Other places, the portrait of the Nautilus is on board the Nautilus right now as part of their exhibits. So I don't know what the story is up in Connecticut as far as public spaces being open, but whenever the ship is open, that's available. If you want to see some right now, visit our website, www.history.navy.mil. Go to the art collection, and then under art operations, there's an exhibit of bikini test bomb art, which is very heavily art from Arthur Beaumont.
Yeah, I'm really happy you mentioned your website, because it's a treasure trove of insight into all forms of expression of naval history, especially through the art. And I'm very happy you mentioned that. Geoffrey, can you explain just a little bit more about the Atomic Testing Museum? And is that a huge building? Is it a small building? Where is it in proximity to anything down on the Strip? And how are your father's artworks that supported his firsthand front row seat to atomic testing displayed?
Well, the Atomic Testing Museum is on Flamingo Boulevard, just off the Strip. It's right by the airport. It's a very good location. It's in a building that's primary tenant of which is the Desert Research Institute, and it's the bottom floor of that building. They're in the process of working on a program to build a new museum, which would extend their collection significantly. But they have a temporary space where they have our exhibit at the moment. We have about 25 paintings in the collection, in the exhibition. Most of those are atomic testing paintings from Washington, but some are from private collections, just to show the diversity of what my dad painted. And I did not know that museum had closed again. That's new news to me, but things are changing so fast. That must have happened just last week, because I was over there about 2 weeks ago, and the exhibit was open and they were in full swing. So it's, I guess you just have to call to find out when it's open.
Thank you for that explanation. So this one's for Miss Monroe, and our viewers give you universal high praise for your stunning and very popular calendars featuring naval art from the NHHC collection. I know that we feature those in the museum, and that's our store, the Foundation store, and we sell out about as fast as we place them. Do you plan to continue this project into the future, or has the pandemic kind of stifled this activity?
The pandemic has not stifled the activity. Actually, it's usually about this time of year where we start pulling together the calendar for 2 years out. So the calendar for 2022 is already at the printer, and we'll be working on 2023. We have plenty more paintings that I believe are calendar worthy, so I would like it to keep going. I would say that train is driven by the publisher. We will go on as long as the publisher would like us to.
Well, if you need any help from the foundation in moral suasion or otherwise, you know who to call, because we love it. And more specifically, our supporters love it, and we can't keep them fast enough. They sell out as fast as we place them, and we get mail requests and everything that goes with it. So anyway, thank you for all you do for that. We're going to kind of get close to wrapping things up right now. And what I'd like to do is offer you, Gale, first an opportunity to make any closing comments you'd like, specific to Arthur Beaumont art, but also to anything else in terms of your personal passion for our art, our naval maritime heritage art, things of this nature. I know we've got some phenomenal pieces in Port Hueneme at the Seabee Museum. And I know that, as you mentioned, the Nautilus has a rendering of the USS Nautilus there. Is there anything you'd like to close to not just close the topic of the art of Arthur Beaumont, but other areas that that our viewers might not know but would love to learn?
I'm sure. Let me start with saying a few things about Arthur Beaumont. He was the Navy's artist. Of course, he followed Henry Roederdahl, but he, with his activities, how he operated, he set the standard for a lot of what we call combat artists today. Now we have a combat artist program. I've got 2 artists that work for me as civilian employees, and then we also have the ability to send out on travel orders other artists. But you know what, everybody who wants to be a combat artist, they don't realize it, but they are actually following the precedents that Arthur Beaumont set, like finding the action and going there and actually being there, not painting from their imagination, but actually seeing what was going on, capturing what actually happened and bringing it back for exhibition and publicizing to the masses. So we owe him a great debt of gratitude for that. The collection continues on. We try and follow that tradition. Like I say, I have 2 artists that I send out when I can. Of course, COVID has kind of put a kibosh on that too. But now we have, the collection itself is 20,000 paintings, drawings, prints, a few sculpture. We do take sculpture too. And it's growing, and it will continue for at least another 100, 200, 300 years.
If I might pile on to your insightful comments, I would like to observe that from my humble position as a 21-year-old, or, you know, from the ages of 15, 16 to 21, where I knew Mr. Beaumont, Commander Beaumont, this was a very charming man. This was a guy that when he spoke to my brother and me, he spoke to us as if we had something worthy of listening to. And when you were in a conversation with he or Dorothy, also known as Dot, you know, they treated you with great respect. And I think that what I learned from that, and especially listening and getting to know Geoffrey so well, and which has been a great honor, you know, he had a special talent ingratiating himself in the most positive way with senior leaders. And of course, if Admiral Leahy sends a P4, a personal 4 note out to a commanding officer of the USS Indianapolis and says, hey, extend every courtesy, this is my guy, every courtesy will be extended. I don't believe we're a Navy that does that to the same extent as we did in those days. and probably two reasons. One is the charm factor of Arthur Beaumont, but also we have a kind of a culture where we fear people that aren't part of a wardroom, or we fear people that are from the press. And our relationship with the press is not like it once was. And so I just wonder, do we live in a time where this can never be repeated because, or was this just the special nature of a great man's personality? What are your views on that, Gale?
Well, he certainly set the precedent. I mean, I can buy an artist a ticket to anywhere on the planet, but once they hit the ground, they are on their own, and it is due a lot to their personal charm and their ability to engage the command that they encounter in supporting their project, that they get to see anything that's worth recording at all. So Arthur Beaumont was a master of that. It is a skill that we still need in combat artists today. I would say that when we hire artists, we do, part of the hiring process, we're not grading them on congeniality, but like any hiring process, you do sit down and have a chat, and you get a feel for, I like this person. I know that they will do well when they go out with the fleet and meet people. And when I could sit and tell tales about how we have sent artists out to the fleet, and some of them have actually been hazed to try and to earn their credit as artists. Like, I sent one to the Comfort one time, and the first thing they asked him to do was paint the ship insignia on the basketball court. And after he did that without complaining, they thought, well, okay, this is an all right guy. And they showed him everything he wanted to see for the rest of the trip. So you got to roll with the punches and, meet what you encounter with some aplomb. And Arthur Beaumont certainly did that.
And maybe that's the teaching point of my question, that maybe we should be a little bit more open-minded about the unique talents of a very special category of naval historian through a different venue than the written word. Thank you, Gale, for your participation today. You honored our webinar, and I'd like to ask Geoffrey to close his thoughts before I close out my thoughts. So what would you like to, what is your reflection and any opinions you might have about this experience? And what would you like to say more about your father that has come to mind in the course of answering these great questions from our audience?
Well, I would make a couple of comments about my relationship with my dad. I was his youngest child, and he took me absolutely everywhere. So we went to Washington when I was 11 years old. We had lunch with Admiral Leahy in his private dining room at Old Navy. When we were on the West Coast, we had dinner with Admiral and Mrs. Nimitz. I went to a dinner party at the Army Navy Club in Washington one time and sat next to Admiral Halsey. And we called on Admiral King when he was Chief of Naval Operations as well. And I was just a young child. I was like 8, 9, 10 years old at that time. But I was a witness to some very important personalities, giants of Navy history. It was a great honor.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your sacrificial work on our foundation's behalf. And we thank Steven Honigman for his mentoring in this process as well. And I'd just like to end and say that as a native Southern Californian, my home state has a collection of some of the finest museums in our country. Museums like the Huntington Library, the Getty, the Norton Simon Galleries, the Broad Museum, and Museum of Contemporary Art lead an array of sites to appreciate art from nearly any zip code you might reside in the state. For my money, the Irvine Museum that we've mentioned before stands alongside the aforementioned museums for its prestigious collections of artwork and artifacts, and for its celebration of California and Spanish art and architecture. The Irvine Museum is where much of the Beaumont collection resides and where the book, Arthur Beaumont, Art of the Sea, was created. And I did a book review on this shortly after it came out, and then we reprinted it and reposted it this past Thursday in our Thursday tidings. So as I mentioned, our board member, the Honorable Steven Honigman, in his introduction of the second Saturday webinar, superbly describes art, and specifically the art of the sea, as an important means of conveying naval history. The battles, the ships, aircraft, events like atomic testing, and tools of the maritime domain. Today's program featured a stalwart artist who superbly represented the portraits of our naval heroes, the combat art of the sea, atomic testing during the Cold War and the littoral, and open ocean aspects of the Vietnam War. Our foundation extends our great thanks to Mr. Geoffrey Beaumont and to Ms. Gale Munro for their participation in our program today. If you are viewing from YouTube, please subscribe and hit the like button on your screen. And if you're not a member of our foundation, please join us from our website, www.navyhistory.org, or consider giving us a donation. Next month, we commemorate the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Can you believe it? We will feature frontline Navy leaders who led us during and in the aftermath of the attacks on the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. You won't want to miss this important second Saturday webinar. Thank you for tuning in today and for all you do for our foundation out here. Thank you.